Mixed martial arts. No one else talks about it. Except us. On the ball.
Dublin City FM.
Hello everybody and welcome to this week's edition of MMA here on Dublin City FM as part of Sunday's On The Ball programme. I am Neil Marshall and I'm going to be with you for the next 15 minutes or so talking all the latest news in mixed martial arts from around the world, joined as usual on the line by Kenny Murphy. How are things, Kenny?
Excellent, Neil. How are you?
I'm very good. Now, we weren't on last week, so we might as well cover the show that took place last Saturday night. It was UFC Fight Night. Edgar versus Swanson. And before we talk about the main event, Ken, I just want to touch on something on the preliminary card, if that's all right. In the women's strawweight division, Paige Van Zant made her UFC debut, defeating
Kaylin
Curran in the third round via TKO punches. Now, there's a lot of build-up with this lady, Paige, coming into the division. She has had 5 fights now and 1 loss. And obviously, a lot of people are talking about her for a lot of different reasons. One being because she has a very unique look. She is very stunning, especially in the fight game, compared to anybody else, male or female. She had this attention before we even saw her step into the octagon. How do you think her actual ability compares to the build-up? And her talking ability has been something as well that people have lauded. What are your views on this woman here in the strawweight division?
I mean, this was a tough fight against Kaylin Curran, and you know, for someone so young, she's only 20 years of age. For those who don't know, the reason that she wasn't in the Ultimate Fighter house in the strawweight division they have going right now is because they allow alcohol in there, and Paige is only 20, so they didn't feel it was appropriate to have her in the house. She's quite a unique look. She's a blonde girl, very unique looking face, and she's pretty. And in terms of her fighting ability, like you said yourself, you know, she's 5-1. So how much of a look that really gives into her ability, you know, it's hard to know. You know what I mean? Because it's a division that's light-ish on talent anyway. It's kind of a clutch of girls at the top of it. So, but she certainly has the ability, I think, to dance with them when the time comes. So it'll certainly be interesting to see where she goes next. There's certainly talk that Felice Howard could be next on the docket for her in February, which would be a good fight because both of those girls are pretty women and they're women who know how to talk, and they would be on the undercard of a Ronda Rousey fight. So that would be the perfect scenario, and that would really see where she is, because Felice is good, but she's maybe not top level. So you would definitely get an idea of where Paige sits in that division.
If Paige was to go on a bit of a run, coupled with the fact that she does have good talking ability that we've mentioned there just a moment ago, would they be looking to kind of position her as the Ronda Rousey of this division? Or in an ideal world, would they primarily like her to perhaps go up in weight after maybe a couple of successive contests?
No, because with the girls, I mean, when you're talking a 115-pound woman, and you know, this division is full of. You've only got 2 divisions in the UFC. They're 20 pounds apart. It's not like this is somebody who walks around at 165 and cuts to 155, looking to go to 145. You know what I mean? She probably weighs naturally, maybe, you know, looking at pictures of her here, 118 pounds. Maybe,
I'd say, you know. She is very petite.
So yeah, I mean, it was just Ronda Rousey. Somebody used to fight at 145, and the Olympics, you know, would go even higher than that. So I think that no, she'll never fight in another weight class, not unless they maybe create a 125. Maybe she could do that.
Could you see her being the Ronda Rousey of the strawweight division?
I don't think it's fair to kind of to put that expectation on anyone. For 2 reasons. One, I just, you know, Ronda's a different caliber of fighter than the rest of the girls in the division, and whatever about, you know, what drawing power Paige Van Zant may have, she certainly isn't this uniquely gifted athlete who is just going to sweep all that's before her. She's just not that caliber of athlete. I mean, you know, maybe her skills develop in such a way that she becomes a champion, but unlike, there's certain people like Ronda Rousey or John Jones who are gifted athletically, and gives them almost an unfair advantage against all their rivals. That's not Paige Van Zant, so I certainly wouldn't expect that of her.
In the main event of the show, we had Frankie Edgar defeating Cub Swanson via neck crank submission at pretty much the last few seconds of the fight. It was a very impressive showing by Frankie Edgar. Cub Swanson winning this would have kind of put a slightly more of a newer, fresher feel to the title picture in the featherweight division. But with Frankie winning, this is kind of like not quite as intense, but it's almost like a Uriah Faber issue in the sense of what can you really do now with Frankie Edgar again? Where would you put him in terms of the top contender, and what is also next for Cub?
Well, Frankie, to me, is the number one contender. I mean, the biggest winner in this fight really was Conor McGregor, not Frankie Edgar, because it was between himself and Cub Swanson for who's going to get the next title shot at 145, and with Cub losing here, that pretty much clears a path for him. But truthfully, in terms of who in a meritocracy deserves that fight, I've talked before about how I feel like Frankie's had enough title shots, but I mean, I've never seen Frankie look this impressive. I mean, he ragdolled Cub Swanson. For those who haven't seen the fight, I'm not normally someone who advocates going back to watch fights that are one-sided, but I mean, he just took him down, and when he took him down, didn't hold him there. He just beat on Cub Swanson and beating him and beat him and beat him and beat him and toyed with him. Like it was like man versus boy. And then you get to the last 8 seconds of the fight, and he gets a neck crank on, and he gets a tap with 4 seconds left in the fight. The single latest stoppage in UFC history. He had no reason to go for the stoppage. He could have just played defensive. Cub, is somebody who can knock you out in a moment's notice, who could tap you. But Frankie wanted this finish. And to me, I watched this fight and I thought this is either number 1 or number 2 in this division, or number 3, I guess, with Chad Mendes in there as well. But I would still expect him to go with Conor, assuming Conor can get past Dennis Seaver, and that's not a very easy assumption. Frankie, I would almost hang out until after that Boston show in January if I were Frankie, and just make sure that that Conor gets past Cub, because gets past Seaver rather, because if he doesn't, then I think he gets his title shot. In terms of Swanson, I think Dennis Bermudez was on his 7-fight win streak and recently lost Ricardo Lamas, so I think that's a natural matchup there. So I would expect them to do that. I think Ricardo Lamas against Cub Swanson next.
Would there be any argument or reason to perhaps do McGregor and Frankie if the Dennis Seaver fight was to go Conor's way in January?
No, because first of all, you need to give the champion a fight, So,
sure.
But second of all, I mean, and this may burst the bubble of some of our more casual Conor fans listening. The last thing you want to do is put Conor in there with Frankie Edgar or Chad Mendes or any top level wrestler. I'm not saying that Conor might not have great takedown defense. He probably does, but I mean, guys like Cub Swanson who have great takedowns just get made fools of against this level of competition. And I as much as I believe in Conor and I believe in his self-confidence and self-belief and his abilities and his footwork and his striking and all of that, I think if you put Conor McGregor in with Frankie Edgar, he would get taken down and beaten up. Semi-main
event saw Edson Barboza defeat Bobby Green by unanimous decision. I think Edson was pretty much the favourite going into this fight anyway. It was a unanimous 30-27 across the board when it went the distance. Any thoughts on this?
No, it was the right call. It was a relatively one-sided fight, and I think that's about all on that one. It wasn't much of a fight.
Speaking of something that may have not been the right call, Chico Camus defeated Brad Pickett. Decision split 29-28, 29-28. Yeah, 27-30. I'm just, I'm very sad that I'm never going to see Brad Pickett be at the upper echelon of the flyweight division. But
I thought this was the right call. I thought Chico took the fight, and I think we'd agreed the last time that Brad fought that he didn't really look like the same Brad Pickett, and he's just kind of fallen by the wayside now.
The next UFC card to take place is
This is a fun one.
Yeah, and this really is, Ken. There's literally 5 fights I really want to see on it. UFC Hendricks versus Lawler II. And it's taking place next Saturday night. It's going to be, I presume it's in Las Vegas. We have Uriah Faber. They've done this before, so it's something we must get used to. And have they done this before with Uriah Faber, Ken? Have him headline the preliminary card?
Yes, they did it in the last card, yeah.
Okay, so Uriah Faber, again, is going to headline the preliminary card, which airs in the States on Fox Sports 1 as the lead-in to the pay-per-view, which is headlined by Jack Hendricks and Robbie Lawler.
Recall, he beat Bruce Leroy, Alex Caceres on the prelims for the UFC 175 card in July.
This time around, he's taking on Francisco Rivera. How do you see it going for Faber?
Well, I expect him to win. I mean, yes. Rivera is number 12 in the UFC's bantamweight rankings right now. Which, funny enough, when Alex Caceres fought Uriah, he was number 12 as well. So that's where Uriah is right now. Obviously, they don't want him knocking off the top contenders because he's had 508 title shots since he was last the champion.
Approximately.
Yes, but so yeah, it's kind of a knock one, but I fully expect him to win this fight here. Yeah.
Hypothetically, if he does win this fight, I'm obviously not saying that he'll go straight back into a title match. But what would you do with Uriah Faber, and would you make sure to actually put him on a pay-per-view again?
Okay, well, here's the thing. He's lost, just looking at his record here, he has lost
Barrow twice.
He's lost 6 championship matches in a row. So in his last 15 fights, he's won 9 non-title fights, and he's lost all 6 title fights. So that means he's averaging a fight and a half between each championship shot, if you get me, which means he's not really having to work his way back. I know I think he won 4 before his most recent title shot. So I think that you're looking at that level again. I think he'd need to go past Rivera. He'd need to go past probably another sort of 5 to 10 guy, and only then could you give him a guy in the top 5 and maybe get him another championship match. At that point.
Cruz is fighting against TJ Dillashaw next. For the belt. So I'm just trying to think what you could do with him. But anyway, it should be interesting. But look, we'll get back to the card at hand. Mm-hmm. Here is a heavyweight fight that I, for some reason, have wanted to see for the last 2 years, and call me crazy. But Travis Brown against Brendan Schaub, 2 hosses, Ken, are gonna lock horns here in the octagon.
No one going back up to that. I think Travis Brown is at a different level to Brendan Schaub.
Yes.
Brendan Schaub has a job that's made his sugar glass. So whenever you touch it, he goes to sleep, and I would expect to see that here.
Anthony Pettis is defending the light heavyweight championship against Gilbert Melendez. This should be a hell of a fight, to quote Kevin Sullivan.
I have to say, here I am having a nice relaxing Sunday afternoon with my family, and you have to mention that name that always winds me up so much.
What name is that?
Anthony Pettis.
What is your issue with Anthony Pettis today?
This guy's a codbill, to be honest with you.
Is it just because?
Yeah. Okay.
Go on.
My thoughts on Pettis are, it's just by next month, it'll have been 4 years since the merger with the UFC, and this will be his 6th UFC fight. Which, to give you some kind of context, in that same amount of time, Benson Henderson has fought 12 times in the UFC,
right?
And Donald Cerrone's fought 14. So to me, if you're going to be a champion, you can't just fight once every 10 months.
Sure.
And that's kind of what he does. If you look at because he's always injured.
Yeah.
If you look at his record as well, he came into the UFC, he lost a very one-sided fight to Clay Guida where he was out-wrestled, and then
this was very straight. This was coming off the kick at the end of the last moment in WEC history, and people still talk about the kick, right? And they still talk about Anthony Pettis as a contender, and everybody just completely thinks it as an oversight that he went with that momentum into UFC and then lost. Yes.
Yeah, not only did he lose, but then people forget his next fight was on the undercard against Jeremy Stevens, Little Heathen, a UFC veteran, and he won a split decision. But anyone who saw that fight, I mean, he got the W, but only barely, and then he beat Joe Lozon, and no disrespect to Joe Lozon, but he's a 500 fighter. He wins one, he loses one, before beating Cerrone, which got him the championship match. And so he's only really won, to me, 3 fights in a row, and those 3 fights have been over the course of 3 years. So
they were impressive victories, though, in the sense that
they were impressive victories.
They were, and he's won the belt, and he has won 4 in a row, and I think he's probably lost 1 of his last 10. So. Yeah, I know it's infrequent.
He's just someone who frustrates me because I think he has some skills, but if you look at his record, the fighters who are top level who he's beaten, I think you're looking at Ben Henderson and Donald Cerrone, and that's it. And so to me, the fact that he's the strong betting favourite here, I take that. I really don't like that. The only thing is Gilbert is more likely to strike with him than anything else, and that tells me that that this could be Pettis' fight, and he could win it regardless. I think if Gilbert tries to take it to the mat, it should be his, and I think over 5 rounds, he may have something for him. But I think Pettis may edge this.
Okay,
and that will ruin that next Sunday for me.
Okay, well, we'll see. The main event is Robbie Lawler and Hendricks. This is a direct rematch from March of this year.
Yep.
Where Robbie Lawler lost when it went the distance. This was the decider basically for the vacant welterweight championship.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. His first defense, straight back in, and yet I feel even with that and another title fight on the show next week, that in terms of what's going on in December and January, this card has almost been an afterthought to some people. But that fight was very entertaining against Robbie Lawler, I thought.
Yes,
and this should be much of the same.
Yeah, and it's a strange one because again, you're coming into a fight where Johnny Hendricks was one of those fighters who was quite active, and then he got his fight with GSP, so he sat and waited for a while, and then he got injured in the fight against Robbie, and he hasn't fought since. And meanwhile, it's only 8 months, but Robbie Lawler, he fought March, May, and July, and he came very close to beating Hendricks in March. In May, he beat Jake Ellenberger, knocked him out, which has really sent him into a tailspin, and he beat Matt Brown, who was on a very impressive streak in July. So there's no doubting that Robbie deserves to be back here.
Yes.
I feel like this fight is going to go one of 2 distinct ways. I don't think it's going to be this really close fight like the last one.
Yes.
Because I feel like one of 2 things is going to happen. Either Robbie will still be so fresh and light in his feet from keeping active, where Johnny, because Johnny originally said he wanted to come back in February, and then they moved this fight 2 full months early. That makes me wonder about that arm of his,
Yeah, exactly.
So I think either Robbie is going to outstrike him because he's fresh and he's ready, whereas Johnny isn't, or if Johnny really is ready and he's fit and healthy, I think he's going to out-wrestle Robbie Lawler. So I really expect it to be one-sided, whatever happens. I don't expect it to be this kind of decision being read out and we're all on the edge of our seats again. I think we're going to have a clearer, more definitive winner this weekend. My gut says it probably will be Johnny Hendricks, but my word, I think it will be the best story of the year in MMA if a veteran like Robbie Lawler, 12, 13 years in the game, closed out the year with a UFC title, and maybe a little happy ending on what has been, let's face it, a fairly miserable year for the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
There's no doubt it'd be quite an occasion if he did do it, and I do feel it will, just taking your 2 scenarios, I think the more likely is that Robbie Lawler is going to come into this with legit kind of momentum. You know what I mean? And
yeah, he has that. There's no denying that.
Yeah, and he's very active. And the fight was close enough the first time around. The idea of Hendricks having a layoff and then coming back against the guy who he got injured against and being pushed forward 2 months, I'm confident that we're going to have a new champion. And either way, it's two title fights, a good heavyweight contest as well. Uriah Faber on Dupree. How do you think it's going to do?
Oh, money-wise, I still think you're looking at in the 300, 350 range. I still think it's not a big money show. I don't think the UFC has anything like that at the moment. When you look at the numbers throughout this year, I mean, it's scary, man. There's a lot of sub 200 numbers this year, and if I told you they had a single sub 200 number in like 2011, 2012, it just wouldn't happen. No,
absolutely. I was having a conversation with somebody about this. They were asking me how the podcasts were going that you can of course get at thisaintfake.com, and we were talking about the MMA.
Sorry, it was thisaintfake.com, wasn't it, Neil?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay, just making sure.
That's it, man. And we were just talking about the MMA stuff as well, and he's not the first person I've spoken to that simply said he really doesn't watch it anymore because it's so over diluted. Anyway, that's
there's a lot of people like that.
Okay. No, there is, absolutely. But I think it'll do okay. I think everybody's kind of looking forward to the Ronda, John Jones, Daniel Cormier card coming up in January. I think that's what's on most people's mind.
Ronda's in February.
Oh, sorry, Ronda's in February. Oh, yes.
Ronda and Chris Weidman, who share an agent, are sharing a show for the third time in a row, if you recall.
Yes, excuse me. Well, then there's a couple of things to look forward to, and obviously McGregor as well in Boston.
And we've got Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz. So again, we're saying all these things, but will it actually come to fore? It's a bigger question.
Well, we'll see. Just a couple of brief notes before we finish up. We didn't get to talk about this last week, but tomorrow, fortnight ago, UFC was supposed to make a big surprise announcement. They had basically all their biggest stars hanging around doing a press conference that was supposed to be headlined by a certain announcement made by Dana White that didn't actually happen. Do we have any idea what this announcement was going to be?
And there was a vicious rumor going around the internet that one Mr. Philip Brooks was going to be announced to be making a debut for the UFC fighting.
Now, Ken, with his podcast that he's done talking about his issues with World Wrestling Entertainment, the first time he's spoken out...
It's just WWE, Neil. World Wrestling Entertainment doesn't exist anymore.
The first time he's spoken out about this, since he's left, do you think the timing kind of says that maybe this was supposed to be it, and that's why he had planned the podcast?
I think that what's also been reported is that it was to do with the new UFC uniform, and there was one of the sponsors that wasn't sorted in time for it, which is the reason that it wasn't announced. And I think that's more likely. It's
nothing to do with Charles Montgomery Punk at all, is it?
No, but I do think that had they announced on the day all our fighters are going to be wearing this uniform from now on, I think that would have been almost as big a letdown as Dana saying, "Oh yeah, we didn't get that done in time."
Yeah, it was a weird one. Okay, finally, just touching on the idea of pro wrestlers going into mixed martial arts. Somebody going back into mixed martial arts, Brock Lesnar. We spoke about this on the This Ain't Fake show, available at thisaintfake.com. But
is that thisaintfake.com?
Yeah, not .co.uk or .org or mu.com. Dana White said that Brock Lesnar is not going to Bellator. He said that if he comes back to fight, he wants to fight the best guys in the world, and the best guys in the world are here. I expect Lesnar wants all things going on in MMA right now to be used as leverage. But what do you think? Just really briefly, without going into it too much, we're going to finish up now. But so we've got WWE, we've got Bellator, and we've got UFC. And let's just say he makes it apparent that he's willing to listen to all. In what order do these guys have the best chances? Is it WWE, Bellator, and UFC in that order from bottom to top?
I think, people saying he's leaning toward UFC. I think he realizes that he doesn't really have much negotiating power in pro wrestling right now. Their model has changed with their absolute failure of a network. So the chance they're going to pay him a couple $1 million to have a match is slim. So I think he wants to get it out there that I'm interested in UFC, because that piques UFC's interest, that piques their fans' interest, that puts pressure on them to get a deal done. And it also means WWE knows, okay, there is another suitor, so we ain't going to get him on the cheap. So I think Bellator, I don't know how, with their business model, they can justify spending the kind of money they need to bring Brock in, but I certainly expect him to make a play to him. But ultimately, I think if he is going to do mixed martial arts, I think he goes back to the UFC.
All right, Ken, thank you very much for joining us as always, and thank you everybody for listening. If you missed the start of this show and would like to go back and hear it later on, or any of the archive shows here from Dublin City FM, you can catch them at thisaintfake.com, where we also release our weekly pro wrestling podcast every Thursday. Until then, we'll be back with you with more MMA, same time next week here on 103.2, and it's back to the lads in the studio after this.
On the ball.
Dublin City FM.